Hi everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar because we have two incredible guests, Che, Erik.
Hi man.
Welcome. And the more because we're gonna talk about the challenges and difficulties, but also the windfalls. And I'm gonna try to get to the bottom of how to use VR in education. If you have any questions, please share them in the chat. Curious to what you guys are thinking, questions, remarks, doubts, please put them in the chat and let's have the conversation also there. So my name is Guido Helmhorst, co-founder of Warp VR, and today I'm honestly very excited to have these two powerhouses in VR, in the VR education arena next to me, because Che Govender is an educator with a special interest in HR management. Born and raised in South Africa, where he, after his studies, provided training to organizations as a training consultant. In 2019, however, he received his PhD from the University of KwaZulu-Natal after his research on customer service challenges in South African casinos. Interesting, man. Around that time, he and I connected on the possibilities of VR for the hospitality sector. And soon after, I learned that he was actually moving to the Netherlands to become a lecturer here at the Hotelschool in The Hague. Because that's where we are. Thank you again for the hospitality, for hosting us. And Che has written various insightful articles on his journey and also currently involved in various VR for learning research projects. So again, welcome, Che.
Thank you, Guido. Wonderful to see you guys and have you guys here.
Next to Che is Erik Meuwsen, and actually is a man of many titles. Currently going by the title of Creative Thinkerer at the ROC Airport College, but formerly known as the go-to VR guy. And he's an English teacher by profession. He was, may I say, an early adopter of VR in education, as he sees teachers being entertainers and technology as a way to provide better learning for students.
Exactly.
He was part of the team conducting 2 studies on the impact of VR on retention, and the first one was published in March 2019, and a follow-up study a year later. During Corona, he was the digital go-to guy for his colleagues, and he sent universal VR headsets to his students so they could learn in VR from home.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome, Erik.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Okay, first question. Just to get into it. So when was the first time you guys experienced VR? Do you remember that moment? And what kind of made you think, hey, this is something I can run with and bring it also into education? Che?
Yeah, so I love that question, and I remember it clearly. I think it was 2017 in South Africa, and I was working as a lecturer at another university there, and I bought myself a Samsung S7 Edge, and that phone came, as you know, with a Samsung Gear headset, and I clipped it in, wondering what this is about, and before you know it, I was hooked, and I said, you know what, this is the future of education, this is what I want to be involved in, and I've never looked back since.
Awesome. Very good, man.
Yeah, I think it happened around 2015, the same at our company. I think it was with you guys introducing Warp to, I think it was the reanimation training for the CPR. CPR training that they did. And we just had a look at it to see if we could use it with our flight attendants. And at that point, actually, it was my first experience with VR. I didn't even know that there were headsets at that point. I was a gamer, of course, and that actually allowed me to quickly adapt to the new technology and make sure that we could help our colleagues in order to use it. But yeah, 2015, and the CPR scenario was the first one. Yeah.
Awesome.
So interactive video.
Interactive video.
Yeah.
Very good. So I want to take our viewers on your guys' journey, right? So, but let's start at the end. So tell us a little bit about kind of where you are now. What is happening in your context VR-wise?
Great question, it's been a while to get to where we are now. I would say at Hotelschool The Hague, we have introduced VR and AR into the curriculum over 3 different levels over the last year and a half. So we have level 1, where we introduce more augmented reality on mobile with our first year and second year students. Yeah. We then move into Warp VR and 360 video on level 2, where we share that more with our third year students. And finally, the headsets that have just arrived. We've got 10 new.
Congrats.
Pico Neo 4 Pro Enterprise, which we're very excited about. And we're really starting to integrate or embed VR within 3 of our courses have already been embedded in the curriculum, meaning it's used every block, every semester. Okay. And we've also sprinkled it around many other courses as well. And we have a research project that's sort of looking at VR and AR with the 3 other universities that we're currently looking at and involved in. So lots of things going on.
Awesome. Erik,
what's
happening with you?
Yeah, a lot of things, of course. So you're specifically, working for the hospitality industry at the Hotelschool in The Hague here, and we're actually a vocational school for any profession at the airport, as we say, with the exception of pilots. So you can think of any occupation on the airport, and we'll have a vocational training for it. Yeah. So we've got different areas in which we use VR. We usually use it for protocol training or procedure training, security, travel and hospitality. We've got aviation mechanics and avionics. And we're also now building like these CGI environments where you can actually just, free roam and do all kinds of stuff. For logistics, for example, we've built an environment where students can learn to load and unload a truck, which they usually are not allowed to do in the real life because it's the responsibility of the truck driver. He's not going to hand that over to the students because if something happens, right, he's going to be responsible. Yeah. So VR is a great way to do that. And we also made like this engine of an airplane that you can explode really quickly. So students can actually have a very quick insight in the inside of an engine rather than have to assemble or disassemble the entire engine at the airport itself or at our school. So many different things.
Many different things, definitely. Awesome, man. Good to hear. So maybe building on that is kind of what types of content do you think VR or maybe not content but situations or applications is virtual reality most applicable to or most valuable for? Maybe Erik?
Yeah, I think it has a few use cases, right? You can either use it to learn a certain procedure or a protocol, for example, like we did. But what we also see is a lot of use cases to gain insight in a certain profession or occupation. For example, the onboarding. So today we also spoke about it. Students who would like to go into construction. We've got a VR application that can show them how the construction area is being used, where they are going to be at when they are graduated. Yeah. So they can have a look and feel of the environment that they are going to be occupying in the end.
It's kind of, what is it, a day in the life of?
Yeah, a day in the life of a construction worker or a day in the life of somebody who works in hospitality. And that actually helps the students a lot in order to see, well, would this occupation be something for me in the end, or would I rather do something else? So it can also be like this filter in the beginning of your education, or to make sure that students, make the right decision.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, so where is it really at the beginning of education, or is it more for high school and then choosing? So where? That's kind of the target audience.
That's a good question. I mean, we usually do it at our open days, for example, right? When students choose, for example, the hospitality sector, they come to our school to experience what they can expect, and then we show them a few VR applications so they can see how to check in a customer, for example, or how busy the airport can be, and that allows them to make a far better decision whether they want to continue this or perhaps shift to another education. And I think we're also building something in our school now that they can go through the website and also see a few VR scenarios to see what would be my branch or my sector that I would like to go to.
Yeah. Awesome. Good to hear. Jay, how is that for you? What do you see as the applications?
Pretty, very much similar to what Erik has said. So standard operating procedures are obviously, within the WAP VR platform are very nicely done, and you can, really do that, engage in a limitless role play, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Maybe something different from what we're doing that Erik's already mentioned is, I think soft skills being a hospitality school.
Yeah.
We are quite considerably a social study. So the soft skills and the social skills that you learn here, maybe you have them before you come in, but they're going to get better while you're here. So, having a product or an experience that really gets you to feel emotion in the first person, to train things like emotional intelligence. So, how do you learn emotional intelligence? Do you experience a negative emotion, and how is that delivered to you? So, does it come through a 2D video or a audio clip that you hear, or is it through a 3D experience? So, we use it to deliver emotion in relation to education and training, and get students to build that muscle around resilience, to take different perspectives, empathize in terms of diversity, and also immersive case studies. So, if I interact with an HR manager and then interact with the CEO of a company, how do I create an immersive case study within 360 video? That's something we're playing with. So we have various use cases, just a few of some of them that we're looking at.
Yeah.
In addition to what you just said, I mean, we also had a look at how could we use the Warp VR scenarios, for example, for language learning.
Interesting.
Usually you have like those apps as monthly where you can actually interact with avatars, where you can't do that with Warp. But what we experienced is that back in our days, we had like these listening exercises. And at some point, I have never experienced them in my education, but they went to watching video exercise, like watching, listening together, right? And so what we did is we actually made a listening exercise in VR, where a student has to, there's a Spanish customer at the desk, and he's just going to talk Spanish to the student, and he then has to decide if he understands what the customer is saying. So comprehensive listening, but this time in like 360-degree video, which helped the student to just focus on that. Because as we all know with VR, as long as they are in VR, anything around them can happen, but they won't know. So they're really focused on learning, which is also a big benefit of using VR.
Yeah.
So creating listening exercises in VR can actually allow them to immerse into that situation. And they're really, their attention span is really caught up by VR. So they're just doing the exercises rather than me doing it in classroom with a audio file. Like half my class would do it, half my class wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
So this is also like, you could really easily make a few listening exercises in VR with different languages.
Nice.
You can even use the same scenario. So we make one scenario for Spanish, we can use an actor to do it in French or German, and we've got the same scenario for 3 different languages.
Awesome. Yeah.
Can I add one more? So something we've thought about doing, but we haven't done is maybe training the eye of the manager. So a hospitality manager in a restaurant or a hotel, they may need to scan the room to see, which guests are sort of unhappy or angry. Walk into the hotel foyer or the lobby and notice a damp spot in the ceiling, and arrange that to be fixed. So Warp VR, the hotspot capability that you have is great for those types of things, but we want to experiment with that as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea, man.
Yeah, it's all about that. Life is 360, right? So this is a way to provide that to students. So you just talked about the benefit, right, in being immersed and therefore not distracted.
Yeah.
So what other benefits are you guys seeing where you say, okay, maybe surprisingly so, right? So maybe which benefits you didn't expect?
So we had one of our teachers doing research about presenting skills, for example.
Yeah.
And we wanted to know if the application that we used made students better in presenting certain stuff. And what happened is that we couldn't really figure out whether the application was really useful in order to improve their presentation skills. But what happened was the students who did the practice in VR were 3 times more likely to practice than the students who were just getting the regular lessons. So they would just do the exercises 3 times more often, and therefore they integrated the knowledge more easily than the students who didn't do it in VR. Yeah, right? So they were just like, can we do the VR scenario once more? Just because they were hyped about VR. And as we all know, the more repetition you do stuff, the more it will actually come into your senses, and it will be inherently in you.
Yeah.
So to learn, you actually have to practice a few more times. And if VR allows students, or actually motivates them to learn more often, then that's also a big benefit of just using the technology.
Right. And can I ask, because often research also kind of talks about building confidence, right? In saying, okay, you can practice. Is that something you guys have experienced or see happening in because of you using VR?
Well, what we see with students that, for example, do the check-in scenarios in a hotel, they're more familiar with the hotel industry. So as soon as they're behind the desk, they feel more comfortable behind the desk because they have already experienced it a few more times. It's not the same as the real thing, right? No. But it helps them because we ask them, does this help you to prepare for your education or at your job actually in the hotel? And they were like, well, we actually didn't learn this, and this that we actually have to do behind the desk, but we feel more comfortable now behind the desk because we have already been there a few times. And it's the same what we get from the aviation mechanics, for example. I mean, they know where to find stuff, for example, where to go to, who to contact. They all did it in VR. And if they now have to go to a person, they just go to him, ask them for help because they already were familiar with doing it. Exactly. And I think the other side of the VR scenarios is also that it's a successful experience, right? So if they ask someone for help, they will get help. And that successful experience may allow them to ask for help in the real situation too. Yeah.
And how is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the scenarios we created was one on resistance to change. And it was about a sort of coffee company case study where you're in this, imagine a multinational coffee company, and there's a change management plan that's being introduced. The student is in the role of a change management consultant, and you sitting across the desk from a branch manager of one of these coffee branches. Yeah. And this branch manager is not interested in this new change initiative, which is to improve customer service. And they're trying to convince him that he lets his staff go for training on customer service. And obviously he says no, so you got to convince him. So, and in that type of situation, I can't answer the question because I don't know whether students have actually, used that. They've met another person like that in real life, and maybe actually can trace back and recall what they did in 360 to their real life experience. That I can't say, but I'm pretty sure that it prepares them emotionally for that situation. So they'll recognize the emotion when they're faced with a difficult manager in such a situation. Yeah. They know how it feels. And I think then using the skills that you've learned at school in that situation, emotional familiarity can definitely be, some takeaway. And I want to come to a second point that you asked earlier about surprising findings.
Yeah.
I think, we're also finding students saying they prefer shorter experiences. Distraction was also something that they said, really 360 video helped preventing them being distracted from their phones and so on. And there's so much to talk about, but let's leave it for later.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so a question on making VR part of a curriculum. So how do you integrate it, and how do you implement it in that sense, and how maybe is your experience also with your colleagues in doing so?
So this is going to take some time, Guido. Big question, and I think this is something that I'm still learning about as we speak. We started the project at Hotelschool The Hague, through experimentation, and I was teaching a course on the future of work, and the pandemic hit. And we were faced with a situation that we had remote students, MS Teams and so on. Yeah. And, how do we get to provide an experience to students through online learning? And the first thing we thought of was using VR, and then eventually inviting Guido onto the course as a commissioner, and starting to experiment with Warp VR. Yeah. And with our first experience, the first experience, students actually made a 360 video on the topic of unconscious bias and stereotyping. True. Yeah. And then the follow-up block, we had a off-the-shelf experience from Warp VR that we used in a similar class. And we evaluated that, and we got really good results. Students were finding that they were now being prepared for real-life experiences through this 360 experiences. I mean, I know one student mentioned that it was the most realistic learning experience she'd had. I didn't say it. And, some very positive feedback. So we took that feedback to management. And I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to present to management on the evaluation of these experiments in the course.
Sure.
And thereafter, we were lucky enough to get afforded a small budget in order to proceed with 360 video and augmented reality as well. From there on, it's been a long road. And we then went on to we took a quick and dirty prototyping approach. So, really making quick prototypes, testing them in courses, trying to get staff to build the experiences themselves. We took them through two parts, a planning and a recording phase. So planning with the storyboarding and draft scripting, and starting with a learning outcome, a learning goal, and then secondly, recording with 360 cameras and publishing on the platform. We tried to take staff through that whole process, and we learned along the way, what was doable and what was not. There's various challenges that we maybe get to later, thereafter, starting to drop it into different courses as well, and slowly, in terms of how do you implement it in a course, I think the key question, the starting point, is the learning goal or the learning outcome, and having that conversation with lecturers about what's the gap in the curriculum. What does a YouTube video not do that we can do with 360 video? What's the benefit of the medium? And if you can find a alignment between the learning outcome and the benefit of the medium, then we start the project, and then we take them through a design thinking template, asking, what is the value add? What behaviors need to be demonstrated for the learning goal to be met? And we break it down into a storyboard that's then broken down into different scenes, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's the planning part. And then we move forward from there.
Cool. And maybe because it's about the learning goal, the gaps you mentioned. To what respect for the kind of the scenario-based, story-based aspect? Is that part of the conversation? Because that's, at least in our opinion, a big difference as opposed to, let's say, 2D video.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a big thing. If you don't have that hero's journey story arc in there in some way, you lose a lot of the drama and a lot of the, it's an emotion. I see it as an emotional delivery mechanism. So, to have that narrative arc present in the storyboard right from the beginning, who's the hero? What's the challenge? What's the difficulty? What's the tough choice they got to make in the situation? Then you get into it. It's not a static linear, it needs to be a very sort of flowing and that emotional curve, and up and down and flat and up and down. You need to take the learner through that and make it attractive and engaging. So we really try and get that across. There's a lot of acting and improvisation that we use, sort of theater techniques to prepare our actors. We're often staffed sometimes for that, so it's a lot of fun. And it can actually be a really fun activity, a team building activity in a way as well for staff.
Awesome.
True. Yeah. That's. I think that's very true. I think our own teachers can actually learn a lot from those VR experiences as well, right? Talking about negative, positive feedback, for example, or things like that. In addition to what you just mentioned, right? So at the beginning, we just started developing scenarios or virtual reality trainings for teachers who just wanted to have a fun scenario, for example. At some point, we also decided that we must have a learning outcome, right? We can't just build scenarios for the fun of it. That was fine in the experimental phase, but now we're just looking at the kwalificatie dossiers that we use them in the vocational education here, and we look at the learning outcomes that they need to achieve in order to become a perfect employee for a certain profession, and then we develop scenarios specifically for those processes, which is also very handy because then more schools can use them than just our school.
Yeah.
But it's funny to point out that the first time we actually went into the classroom with all those goggles, so as soon as you have developed a VR scenario for a teacher or for a type of student, that it also came with a lot of problems when we wanted to deploy the VR goggles inside the classroom, right? I'm not sure if you experienced the same, but we didn't have any card that could charge the goggles. We just had to bring them in with bags. And at that point where we unpacked all the goggles, they were all empty. So we all had to charge them all over again. Teachers totally frustrated because this was going to be the VR lesson, right? Total mess. So we actually developed our own cards where we can charge the VR goggles, and we can actually, bring a card full of VR goggles to the teacher's classroom, and you can just hand out a goggle to every student, and then they can use it together in order to learn. But we also need to facilitate in that order rather than just the material or the development of it.
And did you need a lot of convincing to your fellow lecturers or teachers in making it kind of a VR lesson, or at least bring VR into the classroom?
Well, the convincing, it didn't take a lot of convincing, and at the moment there's no convincing needed at all. I mean, they're all really fond of VR. The only struggle that they experience is, how am I going to do this? Because they see the benefit of VR. Yeah. They see that their students really want to use it, but they're now struggling. I don't really understand this type of machine, this device, and how am I going to let my students use something that I am not familiar with? That's kind of scary.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. If I had to train my students to use a car that I wouldn't be able to to use. I mean, that's going to be tricky and scary, right? So I think that's the biggest problem at the moment. They all want to use it because they all see the benefits. I got a lot of calls from teachers saying, like, this is crazy, we want to do this. And at the point that we're really giving it shape, and they're like, "Ooh, this is going to be tough, right?" Yeah, it's going to be tough. You have to learn something here, and you have to, help your students.
So, and how do you support them, right? Then, and so how do you make them at ease? Or
at ease,
what have you learned there?
Yeah, we provide them with an assistant, which could be me or a colleague of mine. So especially the first 2 lessons, we're there for them. Okay. Especially at the start.
Just hands-on there.
Yeah, we're there. If there's any problems, teacher can just teach, and we will help with any batteries that are defect or goggles that wouldn't start up, or students that have trouble opening the scenario, for example. We would just take care of that, so the teacher can teach. Right. And if we've done that like 1 or 2 times, then usually they're ready to do it there on their own. We sometimes still get a call like, hey, the goggle doesn't work, or the remote is not working, and how can we solve that? We just give them like this little guide that we wrote on the most things that can happen during your class and how to solve them. Yeah. But if not, they can always call me or my colleague, and then we'll help them. But the first 2 lessons were always there just to help them with starting up. And perhaps good to mention that the very first lesson a class has in VR, we don't teach.
Right. It's just purely
we're just having fun. We're just having fun. Like this is a few games that you can play, Beat Saber or anything they can find themselves. They can just go through to the Play Store and just browse through all the apps that they can find. So the hype of VR is done.
Yes.
And the next lesson, we're actually going to do something with learning. But the first lesson is always just fun. Get the hype out of VR. They're all familiar with it. You can also use it as an instruction on the remotes and on the goggles, so they're already familiar with that. And then the next lesson is going to be the real lesson.
How's that for you?
I think we haven't gotten to the stage where we have a cart of the goggles. We're still carrying them around.
With that. We can take care of that, man.
We're on the way there, and coming back to staff, employees, and my colleagues, and convincing people. I think that was the question. Yeah. And Erik gave a lovely answer there on and I think I can agree with you that everybody wants to use it. And I think from within our context here, I would say it's that, and it's also do I have time to learn how to use it? There could be many various issues, maybe workload or and so on and so forth, and that where we've offered training opportunities and we haven't had high attendance. So it's something that I'm trying to figure out. How do you solve that problem? Do you work with the supplier to create your content rather than training up internal employees on how to make their own content? We've tried with student-created content. So we in our courses, we're showing students, and they're much better than me, by the way, how to make their own 360 videos and work with Warp VR and other platforms. And is that a way to create your content to solve that problem?
So what's the answer? You posed the question. So is that a way to create content? In your opinion?
Is that the way? I think it's a mixture of all three. I think building an ecosystem of stakeholders, that's what we try to do. Also, I used to come and knock on Erik's door quite a lot over the past year and a half. I think it's been to find out what he's doing, because he's so great at what he does, and almost like a mentor in a way. And see what he's doing, and also share what I'm doing from this side, and sort of cross learn and best practice, and work across institutions that way. And I think it's important to create that collaboration, so you can learn from others, get support from others. But also, if he's using a goggle cart to push his headsets around, it's working for him, then I can just maybe transfer that and use that as well. Can we share content? It's expensive to make, and in terms of getting a buy-in, maybe Erik doing a guest lecture and vice versa, and so on, and that creates interest, and it gets the energy flowing towards that end goal.
Yes,
that's why I think it's always really helpful to learn other people, or get to know other people who also use Warp VR, right? Because we use it in such a way. You use it in total different ways, which allowed me to learn new use cases on how to deploy VR in my own company. So I think that's also really useful if there's like this short community of Warp VR developers or users that can actually, share their experiences with each other and try to motivate each other on doing it differently, or, because you're doing it, the things that you do with video is totally different than how I do it. And I really like the way that you thought of how to implement it in your trainings. And it's totally different on how I think and how I would implement in my training. So learning from each other in this community is also really important. So, yeah.
Here we go.
There we go.
That's it. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Amazing.
Maybe let's build a little bit more on challenges. Because that's an important, it's not failure, it's learning, right? Mm-hmm. So what can you share maybe additionally on challenges you have experienced where our viewers now can learn from?
Yeah, it's a great question, Guido, and I think that for people who want to start introducing 360 video into the institutions, this is something you're going to have to really understand and prepare for. It really becomes a change management initiative at the end of the day, in my experience, from my perspective. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have obstacles that you are going to have to jump over, go around, or dig a hole underneath to get through to the next part. And you have to be creative in how you do that. So what are some of the obstacles you could face? You could maybe not get a budget for introducing 360 video into your institution. What else could you get? You could maybe not get the time to work on the project. You may get people who don't want to see this being done. You may have policy issues. You may have a lack of resources, so no one to assist you. So being able to prepare for that in advance is something that I think you need to really figure out. I found out that it was two things, and I will add a third factor that allowed me to get to this point where we can say, okay, we're actually using it, within the institution. And I think the first one would have to be continuous prototyping. So continuously experimenting, making new stuff, working, getting your hands dirty, and continuously not stopping with new prototypes, new experiences, and trying them out. I found that often this resulted in some energy spiral after you test it out, and that sort of created a life of its own. And whatever obstacle you faced, then you were able to move on to the next, a stepping point. Yeah. The other thing was enthusiasm. I found that being enthusiastic and as one is naturally, But if you're doing something you enjoy, that it's pretty magnetic, and you magnetize others around you and be that catalyst for 360 video. Yeah. So I found that really helped, speaking positively about what we were doing, communicating it. The third one is communication. Communicating it at every point that you can. We did a lot of LinkedIn posts. We got marketing team involved, sharing whatever experiences we were doing. We were on Instagram, and these are channels that students connect with, and that was really important. It's not just what you do; it's how you communicate it. Yeah. And then obviously stakeholders, getting top management support when leadership is wearing goggles. Eric, maybe you can tell us more about it.
Right?
You take a picture, right? And that's also having a leader that clears your path in terms of obstacles. I was lucky enough to have that, and to get you what you need to get it done. And these are various things that I needed. So I don't know, Eric, how do you see that?
I think that the support you get from either your board of directors or like the different managers of the different educational teams is really important, because most employees still work for their employer, right? So they work for their manager or for their board of directors. So if they see that the board of directors or the managers are actually into VR and they want to see their employees using it, then they will start using it. But I found that the management and the board of directors also need to push that into the organization. This view of, we want everyone to use this because we think it's the future. Because that's something they still see as a company goal, and everyone wants to achieve the company goals in the end, because that's basically why you work for the company, right? So the involvement of management is really important in order to deploy it in the teams. Yeah.
Okay, but of course, I think everybody can agree that that's important. But what have you learned in how to do that? So what? Indeed, did you put goggles, force them onto them? What?
Well, no, I think the confirmation of a management team, for example, or the board of directors can help a lot. So we've got a lot of teachers that think that they are doing the best thing they can, right? So they want to develop a training, and we can use VR for that in order to prepare their students very well for what they can expect in the future. But if then the management team also tells them, like, I think you're doing a great job doing this, it will allow them to be more motivated and to continue the process, because we all know the process is quite daunting. You're just doing stuff, you don't know what you're doing because it's still new. So if there's people on the sidelines, cheering you up and saying, like, you're doing a great job, continue, then they will continue and start doing it. So we found it as a big motivator or catalyst actually to help the teachers develop, is having management and the board of directors, standing them by.
Yeah, but also
cheering them up. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
Giving teachers the chance, the time to do that.
Yeah.
To have the time in a day to create an experience. So it's not being seen as an extra that's added on to your current workload. So I think that's pretty important.
Same, but in addition to that, again, the not just giving your employee time to do it, but also keeping track of the progress of your employee. So ask him every now and then, how far are you? What's going on with your project? How are you doing? Can I help you? As a manager then, like, help your employees to manage their time too. Don't just give them time and wait for the end product. Like, be there with them in the entire process and ask them how it goes, because they need their manager to cheer them up, right? To stand by them. Mm-hmm. That's what I found, actually. Yeah,
that's good management. And if you don't have that, maybe create a VR training to actually...
For managers. Right, where they can experience that, exactly. Yeah. That would help us a lot too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There you go. Maybe create one and use them both.
Use them both, yeah.
But cool. Che, maybe briefly also, and also for Eric, but you also touched upon cost. Mm-hmm. And I think in combination with prototyping, which I obviously like. Mm-hmm. So maybe a little bit on budget, cost. What's your experience there?
Starting costs? Yeah. So starting costs. When we started, we had two Insta 360 1 hours with the stand. We got it off the Warp VR sort of your list of equipment starting a blog. We followed it bit by bit, Danny's list of equipment, and so we bought 2 of those lists of equipment, and we're still using them up until this day. Very nice cameras. We obviously had to get a Warp license, I would say the cameras, you're looking at about 400, 450 at that time that we paid for them each. And with the stands about 500 each. I would say we got the mic stands. If you look at 2 cameras, what's that, about €1,000, some Google Cardboard. We usually, we started off with getting about 50 at a time, and these are about €7 each. So you can do the math there. What's that, 350? I would say of a budget, starting budget around 2,000 to 3,000 euros, you could get started with Google Cardboard and 2 cameras.
With your own content development.
With your own content development. And that's what we were doing. So we were, I was learning at the same time as well. So I was experimenting at home and then figuring out and taking it to the classroom and trying it out there on a low budget, mobile VR way, and it was fun. And that's how you build your own 360 muscle as well, is by trying it out yourself. So you don't need a big budget to start. I think if you're enthusiastic and you want to learn about it, then you can get pretty far.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I made with those really simple cameras, I think, was like a tour from the station of Gouda to my apartment. So for the people who came to visit my new apartment, they could just walk from the station to my apartment in VR, so they knew how to walk, right? And I was so excited about that. If I look back on that, I'm like, it was quite simple, but at the time that I was building, I was so hyped about it. I was like, this is going to be so great. Nobody used it, by the way. It was way ahead of its time. It was 2015. But yeah, I mean, experimenting yourself with the VR is also basically needed in order to develop your own skills in 360 video and how you use it, how you deploy it, and what other use cases you can think of. You have to be really creative with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
that's the creativity part. Yeah, right? And that's also part of the maybe challenge and where people get scared. Oh, okay, how, what, but everybody is a storyteller, right? You just have to kind of trigger that. But that's great. Yeah. All right, maybe I have 3 final questions.
All right.
And it's called the Fast 3.
All right.
So short answers. And I'm just going to ask them. You both respond, and then we continue.
All right. Can we just yes or no, or
no?
I mean, we can.
Come on.
We can
a little elaboration.
No filter. Yeah. Right.
And I don't believe it's a yes or no question. So here we go. All right. So first question is, what is something you valued but don't value anymore? In, of course, connection to the journey you made.
Yeah. Tough question.
Communication.
Communication,
yes, absolutely. I'm not a marketing person in any way. I like to wear my heart on my sleeve, so to speak. And I learned through this journey that whatever I do, I need to communicate about it clearly and in the right channels with the right people. And I've seen thinking strategically about that has made a huge impact. So definitely communication, clear communication.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, the thing that we might perhaps solve with VR or are not doing at the moment anymore are things that we could do in VR that were perhaps not safe to do without. We usually did like these handbooks or sort of theoretical lessons about what not to do when the company is on fire. Mm-hmm. We don't do that anymore. We can just now let them go into VR and let them experience how to get away from the fire in the company by escaping the company in VR itself, right? Mm-hmm. So those really practical situations where we used to use a book for it because we couldn't do it in class. Mm-hmm. We now tend to use VR far more for it than we used to do. Biggest example, logistics VR environment that we're creating where they can load and unload a truck, for example. Mm-hmm. They are not allowed to do that, and we won't teach them out of a book. No. Because you can hardly teach them out of a book. But you used to do that, right? or human factors, for example, they still used to teach that from a book, and you can now let them experience those different human factors. So I think that's a big twist that we're not really, how do you say that we don't see a lot, or we're not aware of. So we're not aware of those things, but we don't do those theoretical books anymore. We're now often try to give them a very rich environment where they can practice their stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Next one.
What's going to be next?
T.
If you would change or could change something in the current education system, what would be your number one thing to change?
Can I go?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, I was waiting to you.
Okay, let's go.
This is like
I want this one. This is mine. I'll take his turn as well. There's a million things, Guido. This is a big question. But it doesn't have to be related to VR, does it? No. Because it doesn't. No. It's a part of it. But what I want to say first is what I believe, in my opinion, what I would like to change about the current education system is learning how to learn. Mm-hmm. I think that, it's a skill that, look at what AI is doing at the moment, and, how technology is changing so fast. Having to relearn new skills in line with the changing landscape is very clear these days. And if I'm a student and I go to an institution, what does the institution do? Does it give me content knowledge? I have ChatGPT now. Does it give me some type of skills like critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, innovation, things that computers maybe can't do that well as yet, because they are cognifying a lot of high-level jobs as well. But if I learn how to learn, I can update my skills all the time. And I don't think we spend enough time on that as educators. Okay. So a process for knowing, do I learn through video, audio, text, or immersive 3D? How do I find high-quality sources online of topics I want to learn about? And, self-education, self-directed learning, meta-learning, I think is missing, and I hope to be a part of that.
Awesome.
I totally agree with them. I remember my first HBO course, like the university course that I did to become a teacher. It's like the first course we did was like leren leren. It was learning to learn. Mm-hmm. And I was like, why haven't we had this at kindergarten? And why is it not part of the kindergarten education, right? Why are we doing this only for teachers?
Exactly.
What are we doing? Because if we learn how to learn, we don't need education anymore, right?
Exactly.
So I don't want to go too far with that, but but that was my same idea. Yeah, I mean, that must be somewhere in the curriculum nowadays. If students know how to, I know how I learn. It's a bliss if you know how you learn. So if students would know that, it would be so good for them.
And I think lecturers and educators are the ones who know how to learn, because we have to learn for a living and deliver that learning as well. Yeah. So we're probably the best people to ask about that.
At least to start.
Yeah.
Awesome. Third and last.
Yeah, let's go.
What core lesson would you give to our audience when starting with VR?
I'll give the thing that I came across a lot is there's a difference between using VR and developing VR. Mm-hmm. And the first thing you want to do with your teachers is use VR, and perhaps then make a bridge to developing VR. But it's not for all teachers. Not all teachers are able to develop lesson material. So perhaps don't expect that from your teachers. Okay. Allow them to use VR, and perhaps help them to create it. But if they're the teacher that really wants to teach and may not have ever learned how to create lesson material, then perhaps just help them to teach with VR and try to find other people to develop scenarios with. Okay. Because it might be a bridge too far for some.
Okay. Great lesson.
Yeah, and just adding on to what Erik says, I think that, definitely planning well. So I'm talking about creating experiences here, specifically that. And when you're making and planning those, really spending, I would say, more than half of the time that you spend in total for creating an experience on the planning side, on the storyboarding, on the learning outcome, on the gap, interview lecturers, get them involved, participation and involvement, and getting them involved in that design process of that experience cannot be understated. I found that if you plan it badly, you're going to have a bad outcome. So think it through properly, and then evaluation. Because if you don't evaluate what you create and what you test with students, you can't show the results. And Erik, he did a great an article on retention and so on. But I try to evaluate every experience we do through Mentimeter or through a Google form. At least I know I've got it, and I can show this is what we're doing. Look at the results, and share that with students as well. Yeah. So the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, I think that's a whole nother topic, maybe also even for a next webinar. But for now, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
For joining. It was a true pleasure. I wish you all the best in the journey ahead.
And keep us notice, right, of all the changes that are coming.
Definitely. That's for sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining, for listening. I hope you learned as much as I did. And looking forward to hearing your questions. Of course, you can connect to these powerhouses. LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. And hope to see you soon.
Yeah.